It's not Obadele. Obadele Kambon. To present to us Africanisms in contemporary English. Dr. Kambon is a research fellow of this institute, and his research interests are serial verb construction, nominalizations, historical linguistics, and the reconstruction of proto-delinqua. So we are all ears. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Today, as is clear from the first slide, we'll be dealing with Africanisms in contemporary English, but we'll narrow it down because contemporary English could be anywhere in the world, India, Ghana, but we'll deal with contemporary English as spoken in a particular dialect in the United States, a dialect known by various names such as Ebonics, African American Vernacular English, Black Vernacular English. So that will be our topic for today. And again, I want to thank everyone for coming on Friday after Independence, which is also my son's birthday. So, so I see everyone really enjoyed my son's birthday so much so that they're taking a long weekend. But we'll go ahead and get started. We have sources and manifestations of Africanisms, and when we speak about Africanisms, we are speaking specifically about linguistic retentions in Black English or Ebonics as it's expressed in the US. So some of the sources of those Africanisms in contemporary Black English would be modern borrowings or loans from African languages, and then also intergenerational inheritance from past borrowings. So both of those contribute to modern Ebonics as we find it today. Africanisms are due to cultural linguistic contact and may occur in areas including but not limited to the syntax, the structure of the sentences in the language, morphology, how the words are formed, phonology, how the sounds in the language come together, phonetics, the actual sounds, pragmatics, speech, events, and so forth and so on. So our focus, as I mentioned, will have a particular focus on Ebonics, aka African American English, Black Vernacular English, African American Vernacular English, as a major dialect of contemporary English. And in that we will deal with inheritances from the past and then also more recent imports. So Ebonics, derived ultimately from African languages, shows the greatest degree of Africanisms by virtue of this fact. Ebonics through vehicles such as rap and hip hop, R&B, jazz, the blues, rock and roll, country, field songs, ring shouts, has been and tends to be one of the most innovative and influential voluntary and involuntary documented contributors to what ends up being eventually incorporated into contemporary standard American English. So with our focus, what we will do is we'll show correlations between Ebonics and the following languages: Akan, Yoruba, and Wolof. Why those languages? Because those are the languages that I study. All right, so our objective is to gain a broader understanding of the interrelated processes and manifestations of African linguistic retention and continuity within the North American context. So again, examples from African languages and Ebonics will be provided to show parallels. What we will deal with, we mentioned that you can find these types of retentions in syntax, in morphology, in phonology, in phonetics. What we will focus on today is the syntax. And for the syntax, preposition final interrogatives, subject co-referential pronoun structures, resumptive with, multiple negation, genitive marking structures, and also agreement marking or lack thereof. Then we'll also deal with the lexicon, lexical items borrowed or loaned from African languages, both in the remote past and also in the more recent era. So preposition or locative final interrogatives. In Ebonics, a good structural sentence would be, where's she at? Where's she at? So that's our question. Now this, at one point in time, these types of structures were looked at as being like a weird derivative of standard English, like, oh, the black people just can't get it. Maybe because their master spoke to them in baby talk. Maybe it was because of this and that. And questions about people's logic and ability to think came out as virtue of the fact that this diverged from contemporary English. But the point that we're making is that this is not so much a divergence of standard English as it is retentions of African languages. So when you see where she at, here you see that this so-called preposition is located finally, and this is considered to be bad English. But there's usage parallel structures in African languages such as Akan, Yoruba, and Wolof. So here we see in Yoruba, Nibolowa, Nibolowa. So that's where you have a focus marker and third person subject, wa, and then at, or to be located. So basically you have this same type of syntactic structure where he or she at. In Akan, also through focusing, similar to Yoruba, you can have this structure. You can say owahin, or you can have this locative at the end, ahimfana owo, ahimfana owo. So again, you have this locative of preposition in standard English, but it's giving your location here. And Wolof as well, fanmonek, fanmonek. Again, this locative is found at the end in the same type of structure that you find in Ebonics. Subject co-referential pronoun. So here you have the subject and you can mention the subject by name. It could be Moses, Mercy, but then after you've already mentioned the subject, you give a pronoun which refers back to the name you mentioned. So an example in Ebonics, Tyrone, he always be getting into trouble. Tyrone, he always be getting into trouble. So the he here is referring back to Tyrone. So in standard English, you can just say Tyrone always gets into trouble, or you can say he always gets into trouble, but it's not necessary to do the two. In Akan, in Fanti, you still find this type of structure. Benyino, oye juma papa, which would be the man, he works hard. The man works very hard. Ochiamino onomensa, the chief's orator drinks wine. So again, you have the subject, the overt and stated subject here, but then you have this pronoun which is referring back to that subject. So this is something that's very productive in Ebonics. An example in Yoruba is my own name. So Oba Ode Ile, the king, he arrives at the house. So Oba is normally mid-tone, Oba. But what makes it go to high tone, as it was so beautifully pronounced by Dr. Okofiansa, is that you have a remnant, a suprasegmental tone, which even though the O, the vowel O is deleted, that the tone then floats onto the A. So then it becomes Obadele, as opposed to what would be expected if this wasn't here, would be Obadele. So that would be incorrect. And Wolof, Bintu Nana Ataya. More. And then this is optional. You can even put this in again. So Bintu drinks, she drinks tea, her. So you've given even an extra one which you can do, and you can also do this in Black English. You can say Tyrone, he always be getting into trouble, him. And this is something that I found to be really common among speakers in Texas. I went to a historically Black college, and there you get lots of different dialects converging. And this was just so interesting to me at the time that they would always put him in. So you would already have Tyrone, he always be getting into trouble, and then they would say him. All right, so this is something that you find very common in Wolof, man, and Dakaru Ladik, which is me, Dakar is where I live. So again, you have this reiteration of the subject. So for this one, you see that the pronoun is co-referential with the stated and overt subject of the sentence. And this gives us a view into a syntactic phenomenon which was commonplace in the past. And for Akan, this is something that you find specifically in the Fanti, some of the Fanti dialects, but it's not as widespread in others of this reiteration of the pronoun. So this gives us a view into a structure that's been preserved on the other side of the ocean. If we just looked at the Fanti alone, we may say, oh, this may be an innovation. This is something new that just these particular Fantis are doing. But what it actually shows us is this is something that was once very widespread across various languages throughout West Africa, which is lost gradually. So for this feature to be present in Ebonics is likely due to Africans who were stolen, kidnapped from Africa during the time when this type of structure was more prominent. So you would find it at that time, and it's preserved over there, whereas it's been lost in many languages here. Also, we have resumptive with, and this is detailed in certain masking structures. But in this case, you see, he always be trying to holler at somebody with his old hot breath. I'll slow down. He always be trying to holler at somebody with his old hot breath, which is to say he's always attempting to speak to or pick up a girl despite his bad breath. So you can see the girl is, oh, she's suffering, but he's still trying to talk to her. So, hey, all right? So you see this, what we're focusing on is this, with his old hot breath. So you could end the sentence with he always be trying to holler at somebody. And this with his hot breath, with his old hot breath, that doesn't necessarily add to the truth value of the sentence. It can, but it doesn't necessarily. And you see the same type of structure in Akan from Pria et al. 2011. Frema kodi kon concept view in the which is Frema has gone to engage in gossip again with her teeth that are burned or rotten, decayed. So this is the same type of structure that you find very, very common in Ebonics, especially when you're talking bad about somebody playing a dozen or something like that. So in that sense, it can be used in a negative sense, but it can also be used in positive senses. So you better go on here with your fine self, or you better go on here with your sexy self. So you're adding in this with type of construction, a resumptive with. And another example, Obia Penasem in a nymphe febi, which is everyone likes her with her beautiful face. So you could just leave this here, but you're resuming this sentence. And one of the things, as far as semantics, is that this type of resumptive with can also be used to assign blame or responsibility. So an example, I remember in high school, very vividly, one of my friends, we were all standing around in between classes, and one of my friends wanted to holler at a girl or pick up a girl. And she was too good. She didn't want to talk to him. However, there was a set of stairs in front of her. So even though she ignored my friend, when she got to the stairs, cosmic justice happened, which is that she tripped. And then we would say, see there? That's why you tripped with your stuck-up self. As though this is a causative type of reading that as virtue of the fact that you treated my friend badly, that is therefore the reason why you tripped. And you can see another example, which is she or he got hurt with his or her hard-headedness. So again, you see the same type of almost worldview that's expressed in the semantics, right? So you can assign blame or responsibility. Another one that's been touched on is multiple negation. So in Ebonics, you can have multiple negation, and it's not a double negative that makes it a positive, it's just more and more negative. So examples, can nobody tell me nothing about no spades? And spades is a game, a card game that's played mainly by black people in the US. So if you say this, it means that I'm the best, so nobody can tell me anything about how to play, I already know. So can, that's your first negation. Nobody, that's another negation. Tell me nothing, that's another negation, about no spades. So we have 4 so far, and we can continue ad infinitum. All right, don't nobody say nothing. Don't nobody say nothing. No one should say anything, so don't nobody say nothing. Ain't nobody going nowhere. That's another one. Nobody is, will, or should go anywhere. And you get the different readings based on how you change the tones. So if I just say, ain't nobody going nowhere, it's saying that nobody is going anywhere in spite of the fact that they may be trying to get out of the neighborhood, but nobody's going anywhere. Or I could say, ain't nobody going nowhere. And then that lets you know I have a gun and I'm restricting the movement. So based on how you change the tone, the intonation rather, that will give you different readings. An example from Ajima in 2002 is, ama kofi dokono andi anda. So ama, this is your negation here, andi, this is another negation here, anda, this is another negation here. So you can add in negations, 10 of them, and it's not flipping from positive to negative, but it's just letting you know that all of these are negative. So you see this actually marked in different African languages. Khamuldara, which is he or she does not know nothing. So if you're speaking standard English, if you don't know nothing, then you know something. But that's not what we're saying in Wolof, and you can say the same thing in other African languages, chi or nimshi. You don't say onibibi to say onimshi, right? Another example, this one probably should have been enlarged, but we'll work with it. So genitive marking and agreement. Here, the example is, that girl head big. So instead of having a marker such as that girl's head is big, the proper Ebonics is that girl head big, and then you can add this intensifier at the end, dinamug. That means very much so. So whereas opposed to in English, standard English, you have that girl's head is very big. Here you have this intensifier coming at the end, and you'll see the same type of structure in the other African languages. So in Akan, Albanoti Sopan, so we're saying her head is big, and here again you have this emphatic intensifier pan coming in the same structure. Kofi Nimpagwati. So again, you don't have a marker such as his or the woman's. Orire Tobi Pupo. Again, you have this intensifier coming in the same position, and you don't have a marker of possession. Another is subject-verb agreement or lack thereof. So in Ebonics, here he comes with that old, for polite company, BS again. So here he comes again with his regular nonsense that he always engages in. So in standard English, you say, here he comes. So you have to have this S to agree with the he third person. But you find that this is not the case in various African languages. So again, it's not a case of divergence from standard American English, but rather it's a similarity or retention. In Yoruba, ora unje loja. So again, ora, you have this ra taking the same form as it would in any other first person, second person, plural or singular. It's not changing. Whereas opposed to in standard English, he buys. So I buy, so buy, and then he buys. You have to have that type of subject-verb agreement. Another one, habitual be. Habitual be, this is something that lets you know that this is something that happens all the time as habit. So she be tripping. She be tripping. That's to say that she acts inappropriately. She be tripping, and the fact that the be is here, it lets you know this is something that she does all of the time, right? He be wild. That's to say he acts recklessly, habitually. It's not just today. If you say he be wilding, it lets you know that every single time he comes to school, he's turning over desks and pushing people, things of that nature. That you have the same type of marker that serves the same purpose in Yoruba, which is to say he or she eats in the morning, and lets you know it's not just saying today this is something that happens habitually every day. This person makes sure that they eat in the morning. Moman kawinile, I habitually read books at home. I read at home. So this type of marker is a separate marker that lets you know that this is something that happens as a habit. We also have an immediate future marker that lets you know this is something that will happen very, very soon in the immediate future. So that marker is I'm finna go. So finta, it can be either pronounced as finta or finna, depending on how you choose to say it. So I'm finna go. That lets you know that as in within the next minute probably I'm about to leave. We finna eat. That lets you know that we are about to eat. All right. You find the same type of structure in akan obekanasam, that he is about to say his piece, or she is about to say her piece. Obididi, that he or she is about to eat in the very near future. We also have adjectival verbs. So that in Ebonics there's no need for the is. So he ugly. He ugly. And again, you can have our intensifier, then a mug. And mug is actually for polite company because mug is short for mother effer. So if you're saying this, it lets you know there are people around who, but this is also something that's more common in the South, and depending on how you say it, again, it can slightly change the meaning. So similarly to African languages, the tone on which something is spoken can change the meaning. Similar, you find here. If I say, he ugly than a mug, I'm saying that he is ugly and we all knew that fact. I'm just reiterating something that's generally known. But if I say, he ugly than a mug, it lets you know that due to perhaps his clothing today or something today has accentuated his ugliness so much so that I must comment on it. So this is he ugly than a mug. So again, this is occurring in the same place that you would find your pan, your bukwa, or other things, lord and voila. He is very ugly. All right. She's smart than a mug. Again, she is very smart. And we can find the same type of structure in various African languages such as Wolof, Dafanyul, and then I can put in my intensifier, Kook. Kook is only used to intensify Nyul, only used, you can't say anything else to intensify using Kook, to say that she or he is very black. And there are a lot of those in Wolof and other languages as well, but you can only use them to intensify one specific adjectival verb. In Yoruba, Oto Bigoni, he or she is, but we don't see the is here. Big, very. And at one point, certain linguists were referring to this as a deletion of the is. It's so that there was an is that was coming from standard English, but the black people decided, let's take it out. But what we find is that this isn't a deletion, and this was a point that was made by Geneva Smitherman, a scholar of Ebonics, that you can't say it's deleted if it was never there. So if it's coming from African languages, we're using English words in order to express the syntax and the structure that's common to African languages. So another example, so we can't even have anything inserted in here, but you say it, big, and then you intensify it, similar to how it's done in Ebonics and in the same structural position. Now we'll deal with lexical borrowings. And some of these are very old and some of these are more recent. And the ones that are more old, you have a combination of, how to put it, like people who are intentionally trying to take something that's African by virtue of knowing that their roots are African, and that's what you find in the more recent ones. In the past, you see these inheritances that are passed down, but that's not to say that in the past you had different waves of Africans who were taken to places like North America, and in those waves, and you find this in other African or countries in the West, you would have people who were already there, for example, who may have been taken from the Congo. But if at a later date, Yoruba people are coming, we're just seeing them as, these are Africans, so let's learn more about the Africans. So you had an intentionality, even going back into the remote past, of people intentionally saying, let's try to get something African. So let's look at some of them. Adinkra. So this is something that's very commonly known because of the cloth and so forth and so on. Yoruba, you have a lot of practitioners of African spiritual traditions in the US and other places, Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico. And in order to, instead of saying amen after somebody says something, people say, Ashe. And that's a very US pronunciation of it because the Yoruba pronunciation is Ashe, Ashe. And what Ashe is coming from she to happen. So this is the power to make things happen. So when someone says something, you say Ashe, so that what they have said will come to pass. And this is, again, something that's known, Ashoki, or as it's pronounced there, Ashoke, right? So this is actually what I'm wearing today, a specific type of cloth coming from the Yoruba, Ashoki, a high type of cloth is what it's saying. Banana is coming from Wolof. That one is disputed by some. As a matter of fact, you'll see some from Wolof that have been, Wolof has been invoked so often that they say that you're crying Wolof, like crying wolf, and saying that everything that you're not sure of, let's say is Wolof, but some of them are less controversial. Banjo, coming from Bantu, and when we say Bantu, it's various Bantu languages. Mbanza, as the banjo. So if you see people playing country music, this is something that for black people, country music is oftentimes associated with the whites in the South. But the instruments that come from it, you know, all of the rhythms that come from it were black. You know, they were coming from African rhythms and things of that nature. Basenji is in English, coming from various Bantu languages, and it's coming directly in the same form. Basenji, Congolese hunting dog breed. As it's said in the U.S., Bembe, coming from the Yoruba Bembe. And in Raleigh, there was a radio station which really had no level of African consciousness. I'll leave it at that. But they decided to do a yearly festival that they called the Bembe Festival. And it's coming directly from the Yoruba Bembe, which is a spiritual ceremony that takes place there. So again, it's not even, you have both intentional retentions and then you have things that aren't necessarily intentional, but they're still found in African, for Africans there. Whereas like bogus, coming from Hausa, boko boko, meaning fake or fraudulent. Bomaye, Lingala, Bomaye, kill him. You have what was called the Rumble in the Jungle, which was Ali versus George Foreman. And in that you had all the Africans chasing Muhammad Ali, who were really on his side because of his stance in not fighting in the Vietnam War. People related to him. So everyone was shouting at him, Ali, Bomaye, saying Ali killed George Foreman, who was seen as very much a patriot, an American, blah, blah, blah. So we want the ones who are trying to knock down America, not the ones who stand for America. So that's something that has now passed into the general knowledge of black people in the U.S., Bomaye. Bakra, coming from Efik and also Ibibio, and Bakra, a white man or person. And this is something that's not said very often, but it's, if you hear someone say Bakra, you're thinking about the 1800s, somewhere along there. Bwana, coming from Kiswahili, Bwana, Mr. Capoeira, which is an African fighting art, which I happen to teach. Coming from Kikongo, Kipura, meaning the cockfighting movements that go on. Chimpanzee, coming from Chiluba, Kiviri chimpanzee, meaning chimpanzee. Kola, coming from Timne, Kola, Mandinka, Kolo. Dashiki, as I said, in the 60s, black people were trying to get in touch with their culture, so they were wearing clothes like this and saying, oh yes, this is a nice dashiki. And the pronunciation, donshiki. So you see that even the phonetics have shifted to something that's more readily pronounceable by Africans there. Dig, in the sense of to understand or appreciate. This is another one of our controversial Wolof ones, coming from dig, to hear, in the sense of to understand or appreciate. Djembe, this is the most common drum in the US. Whenever people think of African drumming, they're thinking about Guinea-style drumming and dancing. And this is the djembe, coming from Bamanakan, jibe, to gather peace together, to gather people around to have a peaceful ceremony. Fufu, coming from Akan and so many other languages. In the US, it's pronounced fufu, fufu, which is the color white, but the understanding is pounded plantain, cassava, and yam from fufu. Funk, in the sense of funk, rhythm. This is the 70s parliament. Coming from Kikongo, lufuki, bad body odor. Or if in the US, this bad body odor is still something that said, oh man, you funky? You funky. And this is thought to come from Kikongo, lufuki, and even the sense of funk in the musical sense is coming from the idea that, man, it's so bad, they jamming so bad that it's funky up in here. All right, Grand Bubu, coming from Wolof Mbubu, the large flowing attire that you find in other places as well. It's the same as the Yoruba Agbada in terms of the fashion. The Gnu, coming from Bushman Gnu. Goober. And growing up, there was, I remember I had not really a friend, an acquaintance, who everybody called him Goober. Goober. Why? Because his head was shaped like a peanut. Little did we know we were speaking an African language every time we called him Goober. But it's coming from Kikongo and Kimbundu and Guba. And when I started learning Kikongo, and I said, I know this word. And this is it. Gullah, coming from Gullah, the name of an ethnic group in Liberia. There's a documentary called The Language You Cry In. And in it, there are these Africans from the Gullah Sea Islands who are able to trace back their roots from lullaby, a nursery song that they had retained over generations and generations, to the point that when they went back, they were able to sing it with their long-lost cousins who in Liberia area. Gumbo, coming from Kimbundu, Ngombo for okra. This is the main ingredient. Impala, coming from Zulu, Impala. Jazz is thought to come from possibly Mandinka, Jesse, to become unlike oneself. By virtue of the music, it's like having a come onto you and becoming possessed. Tender, yes, to be extremely loud or energetic. Jive is thought to come from Wolof, Ju. That's a gusset. Jollof, in the sense of jollof rice, comes from the official dish of Senegal, the Wolof in the Jollof region, which is where they natively cultivate rice. Joomla is a software. It's a main open source software, and this is a more recent borrowing, and it's intentional that people are using Kiswahili, and it comes from Joomla altogether, or the sum total. Let's go through a few more. Kente is known worldwide. Kupigan and Gumi. This is also a more recent importation, and it's a diaspora and martial art with kung fu animal styles which are given Kiswahili names. So amongst black people, they say, oh, we've seen all of these kung fu fighting and Bruce Lee, let's Africanize it, intentionally so, and this is coming from the 60s and so forth. Kwanzaa is a major African festival celebration coming from Matunda ya Kwanzaa. And I actually thought Dr. Kwanzaa may have been first fruits. Kwashiorkor, swollen stomach. Makak, from various Bantu languages, makaku, and that's a type of monkey. Mamba, coming from Isizulu. Imamba, the mamba snake. Mojo, if you say you got your mojo working, it means that you are really on your game. And this is coming from Fula Mocho, medicine man. And you can say mojo for Africans in the US means the same thing as juju means here. You say, oh, somebody put some juju on you. Or you say, oh, that girl must have put some mojo on you. It means that you are not thinking correctly because you are so deep in love with her. Mumbo jumbo, coming from Mandinka. Mama jumbo, mwalimu. This is what's used in African-centered schools. So instead of calling the teacher a teacher, we'll refer to the teacher as mwalimu. And again, this is a more recent borrowing intentionally. So a lot of the ones that are Kiswahili are more recent ones. Obia, coming from Efik, Ubio, Obaifo. Obasum, these are Akan traditional spiritual practitioners. And you have a lot of people who are initiated into Akom, they are Akom 4 and practice in the US. And their pronunciation of it is Obasum as opposed to Obosum. Okay and this is one that's under a lot of contention from Wolof, Waukai. So if you want to say okay in Wolof, you say Waukai, Waukai. Okra from Igbo, Okuru, or Okro as it said here in Ghana. Orisha, these are the spiritual forces, the deities that exist throughout nature. And this is the US pronunciation to say, oh, the Orishas are doing such and such. And it's coming from Yoruba, Orisha. Rafiki, this really, it was known in the 60s, but it really got popular after The Lion King. You had a character in there called Rafiki. Samba, it's a type of dance, so everybody knows the samba, and it's coming from Kikongo samba, which is to open a path. In the moves of the dancing, it's thought of being a spiritual opening of a path to the spiritual world. Sambo, that's a pejorative term to say that this is somebody who is colluding with the slave master. And it's coming from the Fula Sambo uncle. Shule, you had the Freedom School movement in the 60s, and a lot of them called themselves Shule. So my older sister in the 70s went to Uhuru Sasa Shule, which was Freedom Now School. But that one is derived ultimately from Arabic. Simba for lion, tango, and that's the dance coming from Ibibio Tangu. Chichi as in Swana Chichi fly. Ubuntu is it's an operating system amongst other things, but it's a concept of philosophy of humanism and interdependence. I am because we are. And then finally, Uhuru Sasa, Freedom Now. This was very, very prominent in the 60s. Voodoo, coming from Eregwe and Fongwe, Vodun. Watoto for children, as they're called in African Center schools, and Yam from Fula Nyami. So in summary, we've introduced syntactic and lexical parallels between Ebonics and a few African languages. And we've presented these parallels as exemplifications of African linguistic retentions and continuity in contemporary English as manifested in Ebonics. In conclusion, Ebonics is often regarded by grammarians of standard American English as incorrect. However, what we see is that they're actually in line with correct syntactic structures of various languages of Africa, particularly West Africa. And this structure is not an aberration or coincidental divergence from standard American English, but rather an Africanism or retention of an inherited syntactic ordering or preference, also phonetic preference. We didn't go much into phonetics, but you find this in things like instead of saying ask, you'll have it ax, I ask you this. And you'll see these types of similarities in pronunciation as well from English in Ghana, the same thing you see there. There's this preference. And it's common to several African languages as exemplified. And this was one of the main theses of groundbreaking work, Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. And in the Gullah dialect, Lorenzo Dow Turner, a linguist, this was published in 1949, he basically blew away the idea that the way black people in the US talk is just baby talk, or it's because their brains aren't fully developed, or all of these types of things that were going around, by showing these types of parallels specific to the Gullah dialect. And in this one, what we're doing is we're broadening it out to show that these are retentions that are found commonly throughout US English and throughout African languages as well. And the significance, this has implications for the teaching of African languages, specifically to Africans with Ebonics as their L1. So really in the 80s, the debate got heated, and early 90s, about whether Ebonics should be taught in classrooms. Again, it's a similar idea of here having African languages being taught in the early primary, that the language that you think in is the language that you are better adapted to learn in. So as opposed to, being taught in a standard English that you're unfamiliar with, being taught in your L1, in this case is Ebonics. And in teaching African languages to Africans in the US, I found that people have their, oh, I get it, moment when I give them examples in Ebonics. So when I'm teaching them, this concept, esopin, like, oh, this is so weird, this is so foreign. But when I say, he big than a mug, I say, oh, this is something I've already been saying. So as opposed to going roundabout to standard English to come right back here, these two are very close. We can teach this one using this one. Also, it has potential for understanding language development, and it can give us possible insights as to trajectories of continental African languages through increasing borrowing from colonizers' languages. If you listen to like some of the stations that are African language stations, you'll find that there's a lot of English words in these African language stations, but what you find retained is the syntax, the structure, like these things are retained. And what it can let us know is that perhaps in the future, if this increase continues happening, you may see a similar development of Africans using the English language to express African syntax. All right. Also, it has implications for continental and diasporan relations and cohesion by highlighting areas of greater similarities in areas such as linguistics, worldview, philosophy, culture. And this can be beneficial socially and on other levels as well. So these are my references, which I've termed shout-outs. So I'd like to give a shout-out to Ajima and Via, so forth and so on. And I have work that's in progress, Africanisms in Contemporary English, that will be coming out 2015 we're looking at, but it's dealing with some of these ideas of syntax and these correlations that we found. So in closing, I'd like to say the same thing in various languages, Eching, Bachikanam, Udiba, later. All these mean later, and they're all ways to say goodbye in various African languages. So this is our final example.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambon. It's really interesting. Now we invite some questions and some comments. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It's interesting that you bring this up and try to establish connections between Ebonics and African languages, particularly in the face of maybe 10 years ago, or maybe about 10 years ago, Bill Cosby came out just basically berating Ebonic languages and more so on the side of say that Ebonics was basically corrupting the English language. But can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. This was the general. Well, Bill Cosby isn't a linguist and hasn't studied African languages, I'm sure. But this was the common view and still is the common view in relation to Ebonics. And the way Ebonics is looked at by Black people themselves is similar to how many African people look at their own indigenous languages. So like, I live at Hacho, and in the household, all of us have children. None of them speak to their children in any African languages. They're all speaking English in the household to try to get that to be their L1. The quality of English that they're speaking may be questionable, but this is what the children are now picking up as their L1. In the household, I'm the only one who uses an African language to teach my children, and it's Chi mainly, and then also Yoruba, and we're introducing some Wolof now. It's a very good point, and what made Lorenzo Dow Turner's work, Africanisms in the Gullah dialect, so groundbreaking at the time was basically blowing away the myth that these are Black people who just can't speak English due to lack of mental facilities. And it's something that I think is very necessary for people to understand, that you have these correlations. So again, as I'm teaching these languages to primarily Africans in the diaspora, is that when they can see these parallels, they understand the language, they pick up the language this quick, as opposed to, again, having to teach through standard English. So it's something that I think it requires more dissemination of this type of knowledge and this type of information for people to understand.
Thank you. Any more? Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambon. I grew up in Texas and Louisiana, so
Okay.
I'm quite familiar with the diction, the speaking, and of course, when we were growing up, our parents were just trying to make sure that we abandon what came to be known as Ebonics. But still, it was, as you mentioned, it's a very interpretive and exciting way of speaking. Even when I was little, I thought that B was much more just indicative of action, what's going on than is. Is was more like descriptive.
Right.
I'm wondering too, some of the reasons I think for the development or the retentions was because of separation, segregation, somewhat cultural and social isolation. And I wonder, as you see more, even though it's obviously not total immigration by any means in the U.S., as you see more of social commonalities or communications, what is that, do you think that will do to Ebonics? I mean, Ebonics, as any language, is dynamically changing. And, you know, and whatever it's doing to it, what is your assessment of it?
This is very good. I haven't done a formal survey or study on this, but from my own observations, the greater contact that you find specifically through the educational system, so people who, you know, go through that, that growing up, people had this concept, you talk white, you talk like a white girl, you talk like white boy, right? So this is what you find, that the greater integration you find actually kind of going both ways, that you have black people who are speaking more like what is typified of standard American English, white English, but then you find white people speaking like black people. And an example was this Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, which is a big sport, and it's a fighting sport. It has taken over the US. And there was a Mexican guy, you know, phenotypically white-looking Mexican guy, who was speaking to a Canadian guy to call him out to fight. And he was like, "Where you at, George? Where you at?" And it's like there are no black people in this conversation, but this is something that you find, you know, standard advice. So through hip hop, and it's not a new phenomenon. So the way that they got blues, rock and roll, jazz, you find continued flow of basically mining Ebonics for all the cool words to say that this is cool, this is bad. Like, these are things, some of these words that are accepted as standard American English were at one time like this. Why are you saying it's bad when it's good? I don't understand that. Not, oh, that's bad. You know, and then you have these, you know, in different dialects, you can find, you know, this flow going back and forth. So this is what I see, is that you find more black people speaking like white people as typified, and then you find more white people speaking like black people. So
It's becoming a part of the standard English.
yeah, this is again one of the reasons why when we say contemporary English, I wanted to focus on Ebonics, because there's some people who refer to it as culture bandits, that they take everything that's black culture, including the language, and, you know, basically make it a part of American. So they say jazz is the only original art form that's American, but at one time, oh, why are you playing that jungle music, right? So again, it's being mainstream. So you see it kind of going both ways.
Right.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering if there was any, I mean, phonetically, whether there were things that happened to, like, standard English words that are taken into, you know, Ebonics, and because, like, in Akan, you know, you have to say, if you have to say bucket, you say bukiti and things like that.
Right.
You have to add, you know, a vowel at the end, otherwise, because we don't have, you know, consonants at the end of vowel words. I was just wondering if there was any retentions of that nature that have come.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on phonetically in order to make it, like a quick example I gave was metathesis, where it doesn't sound right, or it's not pronounceable to say ask for a lot of black people. So it's like, I asked him, and this is something that's frowned upon, like, oh, why are you doing this? But you can find this in various African languages. to make these types of things, these consonant clusters to break them up. So it's like, how can you pronounce something like that? So you can either switch the order, you can add in a vowel, parenthesis, you can do deletion. So you find all of these different phonetic things that go on. Here we just focused on syntax, but phonetics is a very, very dynamic area where you can see all of these things going on. It's not exactly the same as Ghanaian English, but you can see the parallels of phonetic change.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I have this comment. So, you know, there's this assertion that syntax is very quite resistant to change. But from your presentation, I can see that there are quite a number of, you know, the syntax of, you know, the change. There are changes in the syntax. So I'm just what I thought. I was rather expecting to find a lot of phonological, you know, changes, as Prof said. But it's interesting to note that, I mean, syntax can also undergo such changes.
Yeah, what we were showing today was a lot of the parallels where you can see a one-to-one correlation in the various African languages. So you can find like a one-to-one for various structures in Akan, for others in Yoruba, for others in Wolof. But like for some of them, I would give a specific example. So like the habitual B, you can find more of that, a separate marker for that in Yoruba more easily than in some of the other languages. So like man, you can say that that's a direct correlate to B. And what I find for Ebonics is, again, you didn't have just one single language contributing to what ended up being Ebonics. So you may find this syntactic structure, you can parallel it more directly to, say, a Yoruba. This structure, you can find a more easy parallel to Wolof. This one you can find a more easy parallel to Akan. Whereas in some of the early examples, you can find parallels in all of these different languages. And what I think makes these types of comparisons more salient is that the distance between the African languages that we're talking about. So perhaps these syntactic structures can go further back into historical linguistics. So these may be prototypical of even as far back as Niger Congo. So these are things, as reconstructions come out, we can even look at Ebonics. You can look at Brazilian Portuguese, Cuban Spanish, and those may be able to show us what earlier stages of the language look like before they've changed. So like the main example was like this, Tyrone, he always be tripping, right? So you have this thing, it's retained in Fancy, but other, you know, languages that maybe once had it, they lost it, or other dialects that maybe once had it, they lost it. So yeah, you can see retentions and you can see changes. And one of the compelling things in looking in the diaspora is that you have a greater degree in many cases of retention than you find here. And that's in various areas. So like in Yoruba spirituality, you have Yoruba people who lost the prayers that they're still singing in Cuba and Brazil. So the homeland tends to be more dynamic than the populations that migrate away. Those tend to be more conservative.
Thank you. Any more?
Further on what Mercy mentioned, this business of the subject, the agreement pronoun on the verb to do with the subject, I wonder if that's really a matter of loss here, because you know it's still very much alive in Bantu languages. I mean, you always have to have an agreement marker with the subject prefix to the verb in practically all of them. And a lot of people came to America from that, you know, farther down the coast. So perhaps focusing on West Africa for that particular feature is a little bit, I mean, maybe you should look further. Maybe that really is a retention in America, okay, but from places that still have it. The other thing, another thing is I want to argue a little bit about the negation one, because not allowing double negation in standard English is an invention of school teachers over the last couple of 100 years. And everywhere in colloquial English, people say, I didn't do nothing. And so, you know, it might be reinforced, but I would hesitate to say that the kind of examples you showed from Ebonics necessarily, and especially since the Akan example you had, as you know, that was a serial construction, and it was one negator per verb. So it wasn't really, maybe you could find something more parallel to the Ebonics one, but I don't think the Akan was a very good parallel because it was a serial construction where every verb had to agree in negation with a negation marker.
Okay, on the first point, Professor Osam, my uncle up there, he had an early work where he was actually dealing with this type of thing like Ochiamin or Nomen as a retention from an earlier stage that you still find in the Bantu languages. So as we're dealing with agreement markers, my choice to focus on this is showing that there is still even a link between the Akan and the Bantu, that at an earlier stage the Akan had this. He, I want to say 93, he had a paper where he was basically looking at these prefixes that you still have in Akan, the A, the O, the E, and making parallels to noun classes as you find in the Bantu languages. So in looking at Akan, I would say that, yeah, we can find very rich examples from the Bantu languages as well, but that to me makes it even more salient to show it all throughout. You can find, and like one of the things that I also noticed is like, I would find a lot of syntactic parallels between Akan and Yoruba, and then I would also find syntactic and lexical parallels between Wolof and Kikongo, which are very far apart spatially, but you know, this can help us to look at, all right, going further back. Right. So when you go further back, you can find these types of retentions, and it can even help us to understand what's going on in the Akan example. For the multiple negation part in the serial verb construction, to me, even to have an example that is a negation marker on the other ones, I would not rule out that you can have these types of serial verb constructions in Ebonics as well, where perhaps the first one would be marked for negation, and everything else that can be negated is also negated. So it's not only to say that this is an independent negation marker, that for me as a speaker of Ebonics, I know that once I have the negation coming at the beginning, everything else that can be negated is going to be negated. So to me, that's more of a parallel that you can have both. For the, in Yoruba, you have double negatives, and it's very productive to have double negatives. As you find in the grammarians, this is how you're supposed to speak English. So you say, Kushailo, that this person didn't not go, and now it makes it positive. Inkule shailo, like I cannot not go, and it means that I must go. And it's like you have this particle I, which is the negative, but then you have ko. So it's something that you can find in, you know, other varieties of English, you know, wherever, but you don't always find it in all the African languages. So when we see it, this parallel, I would say based on what we're seeing as parallels in all these other areas for Black people, I would be more likely to think that it's a retention than to think that, oh, we got it from, you know, whites or English people who are coming and they were speaking, you know, with multiple negation, and therefore we kept it. When you see it so productive in the African case, and when we see the parallels of other things that are definitely unquestionably coming from the African side, we're more likely to think, or for me it's more likely that it's a retention as opposed to something that they got from English.
Yeah.
Certainly, yes. To show my ignorance. This is a very technical linguistic, but I'm just fascinated about one thing, just because for once I seem to be finding what has been the missing link. You know, sometimes when you speak to your brothers from Black Africans, and then they speak and you find out they are completely lost. They appear to be speaking English, but you don't quite get anything. I mean, at least as you speak, yeah, as you take us through the sort of, you know, now trying to connecting one thing to another. When you spoke about the borrowing of linguistic items, sometimes you come across, even in your presentation, like when you made the example, she's ugly in the word.
She ugly in the mud.
Yeah, that word. Sometimes you find these linguistic items that you quite come into English and you still cannot connect to. You know, we wrote a module here on Africa and the diaspora, and as part of it, there was a whole section on linguistic retentions. And you come across a couple of such words that you quite can't pin to any African source, neither could you sort of link it to direct English lexical items as well. Like this, and I'm taking just this example from your presentation. Where would you locate?
I have to give you a morphological breakdown of what Denimug is. Denimug is than a mother effer. So he ugly more so than a mother effer, which for polite company I will not say. So when you see this than, he ugly, than, you can find this in Ghanaian English. It's like, oh, it is beautiful than that. So you'll hear people saying, instead of saying, it's more beautiful than this thing, or so you have than. And what they're doing is they're making a parallel between than and sin, or something equivalent in their language. So it's like he ugly surpass, or more than, so that's what the saying is, surpassing, going past. And you're taking than and you're making it into that same thing. So even though it's an English word, we're doing this is how we think about it. We're using the English word to express surpass, a, which is a, and then mf, which is a mug. Let me use the polite. A mug, you can look at this as a standard of measurement. Is a standard of measurement, and it can be used to measure temperature, size, anything that's measurable. It's the official measurement of the Black Space Program. We hope that when Obama came to office, he would convert everything from Celsius into mug. So you say, it's hot in a mug. So that means a mug, this is the standard, and it's even beyond the standard. This is hot. If it's even hotter than this, it's hot, surpassing a mug. It can also be cold than a mug. So here is the standard of how a mug, MF, is very cold. So for it to get cold in a mug, it has to go this far. She big than a mug. So in whatever thing that can be measured, a mug is the utmost of it. And now you've gone beyond the utmost of it. So you can find those parallels when you break it down morphologically. Than and sin, I found those to be exactly serving the same, thing.
Okay. Any more? You'll ask the panel questions then. Can you tell us a bit about what's your data sources or where you got your data from?
Yeah, I have several references here, and some were coming from some of the main ones, like for Akan Nana Ama Ajimai, Reginald Dua. He and others have Dilemma of African American English, where they're actually starting to make these parallels between specifically Akan and Ebonics, and then they also go into some of the phonetic ones. So this would be a very good source if you're interested in more. They go into some of the phonetics and also speech acts like sucking your teeth, which is pia something. Cutting your eye at somebody. If you roll your eyes at somebody. You have all these types of things, speech acts, ways that we move. So you can find those. African American English, J.E. Holloway. Clarence Major has a very good book, Juba to Jive, where he documents, like, for the lexical items, and it's what makes it so good is that he pinpoints the specific areas, the specific times that it was used. So you can find, like, 1880s attestation in St. Louis, something that specific that you find this lexical item. Because me, as a native speaker, I was like, oh, that's weird. I'll never say that. But you know, you can find it like in Texas. Like I was talking about before, in my first year of undergrad at Morehouse, my roommate was from Texas. So all the people who I ended up hanging out with were from Texas. And the way that they spoke was just so interesting to me. I was a junior linguist in training, like, oh, I have to write this down. It was interesting. And then even for me, my parents were from New York, Brooklyn. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. And we moved down to North Carolina, which is the South now. So I had to go from one dialect of Ebonics to another dialect. So that was my first learning of another language, because me and then I had other cousins who moved to Atlanta, and all of us were like, we don't know what they're saying. What are they talking about? We don't talk Texan. We don't know what they're saying. So this was, you know, one of the things. So you can, for me, the Ebonics examples were from me getting things from all, you know, over, and then also looking at these other works. Geneva Smitherman, Black Idiom, I mentioned Professor Osam, and a lot are coming from Lorenzo Del Turner's Africanisms in the Gullah dialect, where he goes and shows these things that you find in the Gullah dialect, and he goes throughout the entire continent, and he had like primary sources, native speakers who happened to be in the US in the 30s and 40s, and he documented, you know, from what they were speaking and made those types of parallels. So that's the major groundbreaking work in that area.
So do you have some recordings of maybe naturally occurring conversations yourself? Do you have some recordings?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
A lot of natural occurring. I set out early on, once I moved to the South, to start documenting and studying, I don't know if it's formally or informally, Black English throughout the entire country. And what was the best way to do that at that time? It was underground hip hop music. So you have recordings of people speaking, like from Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre have their interludes. You have how they actually rap and things like that. So, you know, for me, underground hip hop was my view into how Black English is spoken throughout the entire country. And, you know, for me, I actually have different dialects that I use depending on where I am. So I have, you know what I'm saying, I got my New York dialect, so you know I can switch up into that real quick. Or you know what I'm talking about, shout, I can go to my deep south, you know what I'm talking about, that do that Atlanta one right there. So they sound very different. But you know, once you have the dialects, then you just switch into them, just like how here you may be Asante, but you go to Ekwapim, you go to Fante, or more likely, if you're Fante, then you can go into the other ones. It's harder to go to Fante. But yeah.
Something that would interest Dr. Kofi towards Children of the Dust.
Yeah, Daughters of the Dust. That's very good. Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash. And she documents some of these Africans on the Gullah Islands before they go on their great migration to the north. So you have a lot of very authentic. When I was in undergrad as well, we had cultural anthropology class, so we actually went to those sea islands, you know, got a chance to interact with them. And they have the Gullah Festival, and we made it a point all growing up to go to the Gullah Festival. And you see them weaving the baskets and doing all these, engaging in all these aspects of the art. So for me, it's a lifelong, you know, thing. So
Thank you very much.
Anyway, Daughters of the Dust will be showing this semester.
Okay.
When we started high school.
Thank you very much for coming.